Our next panel, college athletics, the tumultuous present and the uncertain future. I came up with that title myself, by the way. Really happy and proud to introduce my colleague and friend, Len Elmore. Len not only is a full-time professor here, he also happens to be the co-chair of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics, which has been at the forefront of reform of intercollegiate athletics for over 3 decades. With him is Gabe Feldman, another long-time friend and colleague in different ways, who runs the renowned Tulane Sports Law Center. He's the director of that program, which is really the finest one of its kind in the world. He's a Mets fan, but other than that, I'm thrilled to have him here. And finally, with them is Ed Cull. Ed is on his 4th day of a really cool new job as the athletic director at St. John's University. Previously, he was at Fordham University in the same role. Please join me in welcoming Len and Gabe and Ed to the stage with us.
All right. This thing works. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this august panel. Before we get started, just a way to kind of set the stage a little bit. As Scott mentioned, the title of this panel is College Athletics, the Tumultuous Present and Uncertain Future. And our topic of discussion will certainly deal with the tumult and the uncertainty. In this examination, it's really important to identify how important is college sports. Is it simply entertainment for the public at large? Does it serve a higher purpose? And if it does serve a higher purpose, the current seismic changes, do they reflect that higher purpose? Now, for myself and for many, college athletics is what I consider a public trust. It's combined with higher education. College athletics has a significance, a value, and a responsibility to a number of stakeholders, most specifically, all of the students, not just the students who are athletes. They have a responsibility to the institutions of higher learning, and equally as important, the community at large, which enjoys the benefits of the existence of college athletics. But what makes college athletics a public trust worth protecting? It's entwined, as I said, with higher education. It can be compared to other public trusts, such as the educational industry, the arts, health initiatives, national parks and national resources, environmental protection. You can go on and on. And in that comparison, many observers, especially those of us who greatly benefited from the free education, the socialization, and the leadership development we were afforded as college athletes, we're in accord with protecting the value proposition college athletics provides to its athletes. But today, college athletics governing body, the NCAA, charged with assuring that value proposition, the education, health, safety, and well-being of the students who participate. The NCAA is in the midst of the most transformational period in its history. It's pushed by things like the transfer portal, which allows student athletes an almost unrestricted movement from school to school. It's been challenged by a series of lawsuits eclipsing the long-standing amateurism model of college sports. And if approved, the most financially significant of the lawsuits thus far, and Gabe Feldman will explain more, the proposed settlement in House versus NCAA will distribute billions of dollars to current and former college athletes and create a new system for college athlete compensation going forward. At the same time, the National Labor Relations Board and federal courts are in the process of determining whether college athletes are employees, entitled to unionize, receive minimum wage, and obtain other benefits. In the middle of the chaos is the need also for adherence to fairness and equity, such as Title IX. So the next questions that hopefully we can provide some answers to are, Do we keep some resemblance to its originalist form? Does college sports morph into something more akin to college sports? Or does college sports make a clean break and take a new shape and form? Here to report on the impending changes, the catalyst, and its future are two very informed members of the college athletics community. First of all, as you heard from Scott, Gabe Feldman is one of the leading voices in the field of college sports law. He's regularly quoted in all media where there is a need for an expert voice in sports law. Gabe has represented a variety of sports entities in his legal career and has amassed a ton of knowledge in sports law experience. He also sits on the board of directors for the Sports Lawyers Association and several other charitable organizations. And we have Ed Cull, who, as Scott also mentioned, what is it, the fourth day or fifth day?
Fourth day.
Fourth day as the 8th Vice President and Director of Athletics in the history of St. John's University. Formerly the Fordham University Director of Athletics, Ed was instrumental in revamping culture surrounding Fordham basketball and Fordham athletics in general. He's been impactful in fundraising efforts at Fordham, creating, different avenues to really resource Fordham athletics, especially men and women's basketball. He began his professional career at St. John's in 2003 as a grad assistant. Rose to the position of Associate Athletic Director for External Relations, and ultimately, as full circle will have it, now is essentially the Athletics Director and certainly Vice President at St. John's. So first of all, a hand for these gentlemen and thank them for joining us. The first question, obviously, Gabe, to kind of set the stage, is we've referenced the changes in college sports, most of them occurring through the court system. Can you provide us with kind of a chronological summary of those cases and what you believe their impact is? And, we're talking about O'Bannon, Alston, House, Johnson. It goes on and on and on.
Sure. First, it's a pleasure to be here. It's great to share a stage with Len and Ed. And I grew up in New York. I'm a lifelong St. John's fan and a lifelong Mets fan. I was at the game last night. Ed and I were actually both at the game last night, so let's go Mets. Yeah, there we go. Thanks for the two claps. That feels like really like I'm back in New York.
Yankees
let's go
fans
Yankees. Yeah, I don't know. And I want to mention something else before I get into the recap and sort of overview of where we are in the college sports landscape, is that you just heard from two incredible leaders in the sports industry. And I think we are at a time in college sports where we desperately need good leadership. We've had incredible leaders like Val, and Len, and now Ed, but we are in this transformational period. We are truly at a tipping point. And there is no better time to pursue a career in college sports than right now, because we are shaping the future. Right? And there is no clear path, as Len said, to what college sports will look like in 15, 20 years. And I don't know if there's ever been a clear path, but now there's a clear opportunity to make some change. So it's good to see this many people in the audience, and what we're talking about is not theory, it's not just history, we are living it right now. And so the update that I'm gonna give you is current as of about 4 hours ago. I don't know if anything's changed in the last 4 hours, but we had a major development just 2 days ago. Seems like we have a major development every couple of weeks. And so let me give you the big picture. And this is something that I could take hours to do, but I'll try to do it in just a few minutes just to give you the broader landscape, and then we can talk about some of the specific implications and what Ed's seeing on campus level. But for decades, college sports was defined by really two characteristics. And those characteristics distinguished it from professional sports. One was that the people playing the games were students, and two, they were not paid based on their athletic ability. And that second one, not being paid on their athletic ability, was pretty strictly interpreted for different periods of time, including early on that you couldn't receive an athletic scholarship, because that was seen as pay for play and would make you a professional athlete. Right? Those rules loosened over time, but for decades, the NCAA has argued, and courts have agreed, that what separates college sports from pro sports is that the athletes are students, they attend class, and they are not paid to play, and they are not paid based on their name, image, and likeness. Right? That was what pay for play was considered, as both playing the game and the value in your name, image, and likeness. Now things have changed. Things have changed significantly. They've changed in part because of lawsuits that were brought, starting with the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit. There were even some cases before that. Where we are now is, as many of you probably know, college athletes are allowed to receive compensation for the use of their name, image, and likeness. They still must be students. They're still not technically paid to play the game, but they are allowed to receive money for their NIL from third parties. Okay? Now, why did that happen? Well, again, part it was the legal pressure from the O'Bannon case, and then the Alston case, and now the House case. And there's a couple other cases mixed in there, but I'm going to simplify all of these cases. All of these cases were antitrust lawsuits, arguing that the decades-long restriction on athletes' ability to be compensated, primarily for their name, image, and likeness, was illegal. And it was illegal because it was all of the schools that are competitors getting together to agree not to compensate the athletes who are playing. And that, but for that agreement, schools, third parties would pay these athletes for their name, image, and likeness, and potentially to play as well. And that's an argument that people have been making for a very long time. The courts have rejected that argument for a very long time. We started to get a little more traction over the last 5 years or so. And what really moved the needle was the state of California and a few other states passing laws that said it violated those state laws to prevent college athletes from being paid for the use of their name, image, and likeness. And once those states took action, the NCAA had to respond, because I either had to try to challenge those state laws and say, no, it's illegal, to prevent us from preventing athletes from receiving money for their NIL, or they had to loosen the rules to comply with state law. And the NCAA, and Val was a big part of this discussion early on, has been part of this discussion for a very long time, but the NCAA said, we're going to loosen the restrictions. We still want to maintain this difference between college and pro sports, but we think that college athletes should be treated like other students on campus. So if you're a music student, you can be paid to do a commercial. You can be paid to advertise lessons that you're giving. If you're an actor, you can do that. If you're an athlete, you could not do that. So they try to modify the rules to say we're going to treat athletes like all other students on campus. And what we've seen since then are additional antitrust attacks, claiming that not only do they believe that the NIL restrictions are illegal, but that college athletes should be able to be paid to play, that a school or a third party should be able to pay them directly to say, come to the school or stay at the school. And there were a series of cases, House, Hubbard, and why am I blanking on the third one?
Johnson?
Carter. Thank you. I knew I was going to look at Val in a second. House, Carter, and Hubbard. I don't have any notes with me because I just have been doing this presentation for so long but anyway. So House, Carter, and Hubbard, and those three were settled. And there was a proposed settlement that was put forward to a federal judge in California that was preliminarily approved 2 days ago or 3 days ago, this week. And it will do three things. Right? And then I'll touch on employment quickly and then turn it over to Ed, but do three things. One, it will provide back damages to college athletes who played from 2016 basically until present day in a total of $2.78 billion. Divided up on a formula that was come up by an economic expert for the plaintiffs that will majority go to football players, and then sort of the second tier is men's basketball players and women's basketball players, and then all other athletes. That's $2.78 billion divided over 10 years paid out to athletes. Right? That's the damages. Then there's the new model going forward. The new model going forward will allow the Autonomy 5 schools. You might say, well, aren't there only 4 autonomy conferences? There are actually 5 for purposes of the lawsuit because the Pac-12 is named as one of the defendant conferences. It will allow all of those schools in those conferences to share up to 22% of a defined set of revenue with their athletes each year, which would amount to about $20 million to start and then maybe go up to in the low 30s. And that's up to the schools and the conferences to decide how they're going to pay their athletes. Right? And that's supposed to be for essentially the value of their broadcast rights, among other things. Right? So Ed is going to have to decide how much of that money they want to share with the athletes and then how they're going to divide that money amongst their athletes. You don't have to share the 22%, but you're permitted. So it is a cap, but there is no floor. Right? You can decide, we as an individual school are not going to provide anything. Probably will struggle getting recruits, but you can decide you're not going to provide anything. And then the third big piece of it is that the settlement will eliminate scholarship limits. Right? For a long time, we've had scholarship limits depending on the sport. There were different ways to calculate scholarship limits. They're eliminating scholarship limits. Instead, they're going to put roster limits in place. So for football, FBS football, the old rule was you had 85 scholarships, but teams would carry a lot more than that in terms of walk-ons. Now the roster limit is 105. And you can scholarship all 105 of them, but you can't have more than 105 on your roster. So schools, again, are going to decide where they're going to give additional scholarships, how they're going to do that in compliance with Title IX. And then the last piece is name, image, and likeness. There is still the ability for athletes to be compensated for the use of their name, image, and likeness. But it really sets up a model that's similar to professional sports. In pro sports, you have a salary cap, and then athletes can do NIL deals. But you can't do an NIL deal that is designed to circumvent the salary cap. And college sports is trying to create a similar system where you can do an NIL deal, but we don't want collectives and boosters paying $1 million to an athlete, calling it NIL, but it's really designed to supplement their income or their salary. So the NCAA is going to bring in a third party that is going to oversee these deals to ensure that they are legitimate NIL deals. Not to take money away from the athletes, but to make sure that the athletes are getting what they're supposed to be getting, which is compensation for use of their NIL. So let me stop there, because I think we're already out of time. But let me turn it over to Ed, and we can talk about the employment issues as we go on, but go ahead.
Well, Ed, first of all, as an athletic director, and thanks, Gabe, for setting the stage, you know, all that Gabe has mentioned and the impact of that, from your viewpoint, how have these cases had an impact on athletics overall, but particularly for, say, an FCS school like your previous employer, Fordham?
Correct.
And also on a Division I basketball school with no football like St. John?
Correct. I appreciate that. And first and foremost, I too, thankful to being here, honored to be here with all of you. Not long ago, obviously, well, actually very long ago, I was a student like many of you sitting in this audience. And again, thoughts and prayers to anybody who's been impacted by, or family's been impacted by any of these hurricanes. We have some challenging, very challenging issues here in college athletics, but none obviously compared to that. So thoughts on all that. And Gabe summarizes it well. First and foremost, let me reiterate what an authority he is in our industry. I know ADs around the country and all the conferences I work with, we wait on a weekly basis for his posts, his interpretations, his weekly podcast on how things are going and how to interpret this challenging landscape legally, but also just the matter of trying to read the tea leaves the best we can and get more and more information. As he said, it changes.
Sportswise, a podcast about sports and the law. Sportswise, a podcast about sports and the law. You don't have to listen to it, just give it 5 stars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well done. But I highly recommend it, really do, because it's important as we navigate, as he said, hour by hour. This is changing. We're getting more and more information. First and foremost, I'd say this. Len asked in his opening statement, a bunch of questions. What's the role of athletics? Where does it go from here? How professional do we want it to be? What does it represent for each of us? From an institutional standpoint, from a campus standpoint, you know, Gabe said Ed has to decide on how he wants to move forward. I wish it was that easy, that it was Ed's decision in terms of deciding on millions and millions of dollars of incremental investment in a college athletics program. And that's been a little bit of I think the first issue is truly identifying from an institutional standpoint, what role does athletics play on your campus for your college and university? You know, the old saying, who are you? Who do you want to be and how are we going to get there? Gabe's been extremely helpful to me personally at Fordham University the last couple of years. Now that he's our biggest St. John's booster and season ticket holder, he will continue to be a great advocate for me. But he's given me millions of summaries like that, and he knows it better than anybody. But he'll always pause at some point and say, but Ed, who do you want to be? Who does the institution want to be? What's the vision for athletics on your campus in an institution? In the last 2 years, I've spent a ton of time doing a strategic plan and assessing athletics and trying to prepare as much as we can for this, and 90 pages of data and metrics on geography, facilities, Title IX, peer institutions, football, non-football, diversity, discount rates, you name it, in terms of evaluating who we are as an athletics department. And it truly becomes, what role does athletics play for your university? So not only your president of university, your board of trustees, for your state schools, obviously the government, where do they see the value in athletics and the role it plays? And I think that truly is the first question. I think for a lot of schools, the Knights Commission has been very vocal about what restructuring and in favor of restructuring. And I think we all agree, right? College athletics was in need for that. Division I, from the top of the spectrum to the bottom of the spectrum, was always a little bit out of whack in terms of resources and commitment and who's the right fit and is it a fair playing field. And we often forget about Division II and III in these conversations, right? How do we really take full value of all the student athletes in this? And it begins on campus. And at St. John's, that was a big part of my process, even in the interview. Fully committed to basketball. Got to win in basketball. Obviously, commitment in terms of the Big East. You heard our wonderful commissioner and what a great leader she is. The institution is committed. Now we're still trying to figure out how much the rev share will be or how it's going to play out in terms of employee status and the next steps of the antitrust piece. But the commitment is there. We're all in. The members of the Big East are all unified in terms of knowing that it's basketball. You're hearing a lot about the power conferences, their position to football, and it is all football and basketball. But understanding it drives enrollment. It's their academic profile. It helps in terms of marketing. It's community engagement. It's the service initiative. It's truly, all the aspects of that 360 wheel are being hit by athletics. And that investment is truly showing you an ROI. So these cases are just reminders to us, all right, we are fully committed. So now how do we navigate the strategy and plan? I think it should be more about trying to identify those details of, all right, how do we move forward? We need more revenue. Everybody knows that, right? That never ends. Whether it be fundraising, whether it be obviously capital projects, whether that be NIL, how do we continue to generate revenue, especially if we're sharing it now with student athletes? So it's a professional model for sure. It used to always be tongue-in-cheek. This is a business. Now there's no hiding it. From the NCAA down, you either have power football, you have power basketball, and this is what we're doing moving forward. So I say it's really important, and it was challenging, I think, for a lot of institutions, Len, to say, all right, we're all in or we're all out on this thing. And you're going to see a lot of schools, unfortunately, drop down in weight class on this. And that's okay, playing the role of what they need to do with the best institution, providing opportunities for student athletes, but making sure that they're positioned globally. And it's not just athletics versus academics, which obviously has always been a history on many campuses. It's truly the global position of an institution.
Thanks, Ed. And I'm going to stick with you for a second. Again, from your viewpoint as an athletic director and obviously as a fundraiser, et cetera, the most visible vehicle for getting money into the hands of student athletes has been name, image, and likeness. And just what have you observed as far as the relationship among sponsors, institutions, collectives, and the athletes at this moment?
I think it's continued to evolve. It's continued to evolve in a more open-minded standpoint. I think, early on, last 2 or 3 years, a little bit of pushback of amateurism and take pride in the college scholarship and take appreciation in the education. I think it's evolving where I've seen a lot more donors and alums and boosters get more comfortable with the concept. You're seeing corporations repivot their marketing strategy on utilization of student athletes, especially on social media. So I think it continues to evolve. I think there's a lot of landmines out there, though, Len. A lot of folks see opportunities to make money around this, whether it be marketing agents or handlers or companies. And you're finding student athletes have a lot of representation at a very young age. And so you got to be very careful on how we educate them.
Have you seen any detrimental impact of the pursuit for name, image, and likeness money on student athletes themselves? I've heard a lot about mental health issues, et cetera.
Yeah, I do see some of that. I know you probably saw the quarterback at UNLV, which is another Long Island kid like Gabe and myself from UNLV, and He's actually sitting out because they did not honor the NIL commitment that he was promised. I think it's a big requirement. It's often forgotten that they need to do appearances, or they need to do services, or they need to post on social media. It is a job. It is a required services based on their contract. They have to pay taxes. They have to make sure they have contracts that are signed and looked over by lawyers. So I know the money is wonderful, and I fully support student athletes getting as much opportunity as possible in the free market, but making sure that we are educating them and preparing them. How are you going about choosing a lawyer? Do you have an IRS accountant that is looking at your situation? Do you be careful on having conversations with coaches and who's promising what? So it's really created a very challenging. I know many refer to the Wild Wild West, but I do think I really want to say that there is a beautiful purity to it, because only 4 or 5 years ago, if you were, I had a baseball player who played guitar professionally. He can now do that at a wedding and get paid for it. I had a tennis player who was a professional tattoo artist. She can give tattoos and get paid for it. They weren't able to do that 5 years ago. Or just if Gabe's child wanted to do a lesson with one of my basketball players, we could now do that and get paid for it. That wasn't the case. So it's the pay for play that I think is causing obviously a lot of those challenges, and that's obviously not going away, and that's a concern moving forward as we navigate the revenue sharing and balancing of NIL on top of it.
I thought that was a free lesson. We have to pay for that one.
And Gabe, we talked about, and you summarized beautifully the cases and the impact they've had on the industry of college athletics, but specifically, it's had impact in a different way. And let's talk about the rise of women's sports, the popularity and its growth. What impact do these cases, if any, have on women's sports? Is it separate, different, distinct?
Yeah, well, so part of the question there, and I just want to go back to Ed's point for a second about the Wild West term that you've probably heard a lot. And what we're looking at right now, and again, this is why I think there's such an opportunity for people who are interested in college sports and working in college sports, is we went from an unbelievably strictly regulated landscape for college athletics, where improper benefits, right? That was the thing that we were worried about, because then athletes might be ineligible, and an improper benefit was very strictly interpreted to avoid any compensation outside of your scholarship and room and board. And so one of the famous examples of it, that where the NCAA had to be strict because they didn't want to open the door and people find ways to funnel money to athletes, was that athletes were allowed to have bagels, but not spreads on the bagels. That you could serve them a bagel, that wasn't an improper benefit, but if you served cream cheese, then that was an NCAA violation.
A schmear is a violation.
Yeah. And so there were examples of that. That was not because the NCAA was anti-cream cheese or anti-athletes having tastier bagels. It was just they were trying to create a bright line that separated college sports from pro sports. And sometimes that line seemed like it was unfair. The enforcement of that was unfair. Now we're in a system where, after decades of not allowing any benefits, and saying we want to keep boosters away from our athletes, we want to keep agents away from our athletes, they are all now on campus. Right? They are all dealing with these athletes. And the athletes have a right to do that, but we've gone from a completely regulated environment to a largely unregulated environment, not because the NCAA said we don't want to regulate this. It's because when they did try to regulate it, they kept getting sued. And those lawsuits were having more and more success. And so we are at a weird point right now where there's not an equilibrium. The House case might bring us a partial equilibrium because it will put more rules around compensation, NIL, and revenue sharing. But there's still a lot that has to be decided. There's still a lot that will be determined in terms of the relationship between schools and their athletes, and the relationship between athletes and third parties and boosters, and how that will all look. In terms of women's sports, in terms of Title IX, it's one of the great unanswered questions. It will eventually have an answer, but let me give you the sort of the issue that many athletic directors and university presidents and conference commissioners and lawyers are talking about. Is, remember, we've got the back damages, but then we have the revenue sharing going forward. And the revenue sharing going forward If a school, let's say it's an FBS school, if a school says, all right, we've got $20 million to distribute to our athletes, and we want to spend $18 million of that on our football team. If Title IX applies, and it applies like it does, let's say, for scholarships, the scholarships say they have to be proportionate to the percentage of the genders participating in sports. Well, if you're paying $18 million to your male athletes, all your football players are male athletes, at least at this point, you can't provide anywhere close to an equitable amount to your female athletes. So will Title IX require that compensation, that revenue sharing, to be distributed equitably? If so, that's going to have a significant impact on how much female athletes get versus male athletes. Or does Title IX not apply at all because this is seen as just a third-party payment that's going through the school and the conference, but it's really third-party to the athlete? And if it doesn't apply at all, then we will likely see, it's going to be a school decision, but schools spending just what they find is most valuable to them. If that's football, that'll be football. If it's softball, it'll be softball. But Title IX won't be a part of that calculation. I think most people, myself included, believe that there is no clear answer right now to how Title IX will apply, but I do think Title IX will apply, right? And I do think there's always a question that comes up that if somebody wants to do anything around college sports, they say, well, but what about Title IX? Well, Title IX is a federal law that all schools have to comply with. And when there's a change made in the rules, people don't say, well, what about contract law? Yeah, you have contract law. You have to figure out how to run your business in compliance with the law, and Title IX is a law. Now, there are ways I think it can benefit female athletes tremendously, right, if they are provided an equitable amount of that revenue sharing, but I can tell you that plaintiffs' lawyers are looking at this and waiting for schools and conferences to make decisions, and if 90% of the money goes to male athletes, there will be a Title IX lawsuit, likely, on behalf of the female athletes. If 50% of the money goes to male athletes and 50% of the money goes to female athletes, there will likely be a Title IX lawsuit brought by the male athletes, under either scenario, claiming that they are being discriminated on the basis of their gender in violation of Title IX. So it's just one of the many, many issues that puts athletic directors, university presidents, conferences in a difficult position.
All right, and at this point, I want to take a moment and talk about advocacy, because throughout the years, there have been scandals in college sports. There have been issues regarding graduation rates, inequitable treatment, et cetera. And advocacy is so important. This is the time for a little shameless self-promotion. As co-chair of the Knight Commission for Intercollegiate Athletics, and you can find more information, knightcommission.org. Gabe is a consultant with us. We rely heavily on his knowledge and expertise. But the Knight Commission's purpose is to develop, promote, and lead transformational change in college sports, and to prioritize the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. Started in 1989 because of low graduation rates for college football and college basketball players. I think they recognized that it really was an assault on the integrity of higher education, and the academic integrity particularly. And it's made up of university presidents, athletic directors, former college athletes, and really thought leaders in college sports. And we're advocates for just that, the education, health, safety, and success. And so through its inception, the impact has been felt getting independent directors on the NCAA board. Research and public meetings help maximize the stated priorities that I've just mentioned. And really, the reason why I say that is because you guys have an opportunity for advocacy as well. If you believe, again, that college sports, college athletics is a public trust, that as alum with your favorite school, et cetera, you want to see them continue to prioritize education, health, safety, and success, you can speak out as well in support of those principles. And whether it's with a program like the Knight Commission, whether it's with other advocacy programs, as people who enjoy college sports, it's important to really get involved. You know, I want to talk about NIL once again with the participation of collectives and alumni. You know, what role do they play? How do you keep them at bay? Because obviously there's a tendency to get out of control.
So really interesting question, Len. Something obviously we continue to navigate, you know, day by day in terms of the changes, whether that be state or the legislation against it. It's first thing is you want to, of course, support your NIL, right? It's important to the recruiting piece. I think everybody understands that. An institution like St. John's right now, I believe, has 3 outside collectives. So, which obviously are run independently, often by alums or boosters, and they have obviously some hopefully legal representation or alumni lawyers that are a part of that process. And obviously you want to support them. They are trying to help your athletics department. They're trying to help your student athletes. They're trying to help the success of your programs. So naturally, an AD's role is, all right, I want to also help them in terms of their willingness to, in essence, volunteer their time and help our student athletes. But it's a really delicate juggling act, Len, because you also have alumni that you're trying to fundraise for. We have capital projects. We want to build renovations on campus. There's other scholarship needs for other programs. You want to make sure you're taking care of all your Olympic sports the best you can. So the juggling act of how you are, in essence, soliciting sometimes the same people for NIL as you are for an institutional's fundraising initiative. You want them to buy season tickets. You want them to buy merchandise. You want them to obviously attend games. So it's delicate in terms of like the legality of it. I think right now it's kind of been very much, well, that's the outside collective. We try to help them and support them as they can, but they're almost on their own, as I see my lawyer here shaking his head, because it's not under our umbrella. So you don't want the collective necessarily always be representation of your institution. We are not running them. We're not managing them. We're not legally advising them. So it's a delicate dance. And that's where, you know, even right now, this idea that, all right, it's on the institution to oversee NIL at your campus. I get it, and I get why the NCAA would want that, but that's extremely challenging concept because you don't know all the facets, you don't know all the people, they do not work with you in an office space, you're not sharing any kind of cubicle with your NIL collectives externally. So to even mandate that all student athletes provide you their contracts or the agreements, it's gonna be very, very interesting to see how this shakes out, because that becomes a whole nother full-time staff, full-time department, and offer to do that. You know, it's often, everybody's like, oh, it's professional sports. We get that, simple concept, right? We need to raise more money. Let's get a bigger ticket staff. Let's get a bigger sponsorship staff. Let's get an NIL team. But, and I've worked in professional sports, it's much more challenging on a college campus because we're educating student athletes. We provide mental health and sports nutrition. We provide housing. We are providing them you know, academic center and advising and tutoring. We, of course, are doing what we can on NIL. It's way more responsibilities on a campus than any NFL team in the country right now based on that. So this idea that we could just do it on campus, I think is misleading and misthought, because it's a lot of staff. That's gonna be that much more of an investment. And of course, we continue to navigate the legalities of this on a daily basis. So you want to be helpful. I think everybody's proactive in being helpful, but also very cautious to be like, well, you're not representing the institution. You're representing your own collective externally.
And there's also, I mean, keep in mind that one of the key principles for the NCAA was that the schools should not be compensating the athletes to induce them to come to the school or to help them stay at the school.
Right.
So it was keep the institutions out of it. And that meant, well, all right, then the third parties are going to be involved, and then the third parties form these collectives. And imagine the Mets, their front office said, well, we can't negotiate directly with the athlete, but a group of fans can. And our wealthiest fans are going to make offers to the starting pitcher to get them to come to the team. And that's a difficult position. So now we're trying to bring the control back into the institution, but do it in a way that's consistent, again, with this overall collegiate model. So it's a really complicated situation. And I think that everybody that you will talk to within college sports wants college athletes to get more. Right? They believe that college athletes are entitled to some fair amount, more than they've had in the past. But the question is, how do we give athletes more while maintaining what we all love about college sports and the opportunities it provides for college athletes of both genders? And last thing I'll say going back to the gender equity piece, there's the law, right, what Title IX requires, which is unclear in a lot of cases. But there's also just a general idea of being equitable, that even if the law doesn't require you, the schools can choose to act in a way that is more equitable. And an answer a lot of people give when you say, well, just give the athletes what the market would give them. And if the football players would be getting more money from the market, give the football players more money. And I get that argument. We're based on a free market, we're capitalism. But I want you to just keep in mind that the market is the way the market is, at least in part because of decades of discrimination against women. And if women were given more opportunities in sports, they would be more valuable, right? Not saying that it would be as valuable as NFL players, but it's a difficult defense to just say, well, the market doesn't value women's sports when for years we have discriminated against women's sports.
And I would quickly just add to the equity conversation. I totally agree with Gabe. On campuses, we are fully preparing for some formula of Title IX to be executed and enforced in the rev share. I don't see any way how that would not be the case. So again, making sure that we are adding that additional incremental investment in our budget lines and our forecast here moving forward, we totally are expecting that to be the case as well.
Well, this has been a terrific discussion, even throughout, without even mentioning things like conference realignment and that impact, et cetera. But I'm going to ask you both to look into your crystal ball with the few minutes that we have left. We talked about the tumultuous present, and we've discussed it. Now, the uncertain future, conference realignment, expanded NIL, employee status for student athletes, the increase in media rights, which means the pot is bigger. Where are we going to go? What are we going to be 5 years from now? Will there be a standardized NIL policy that will help folks like athletic directors? With all the litigation that's going on and potentially to continue, will there even be an NCAA? Or will the governing body shift and change in its focus and in its operation? Finally, what's the role when we talk about paying out monies, billions of dollars over the next 10 years, and it might strap certain institutions? Is there room for other funding like private equity, et cetera, et cetera? I'm just throwing those ideas out there. You don't have to marry them, but what's the future look like?
So I have part of the crystal ball is St. John's, Tulane, and Duke in the Final Four. I don't know who the fourth school is. But
Amen.
That's part of it.
Is that basketball? No.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's hard. It's obviously hard to answer because there's so many variables. Sure. And I would say that for what to watch for, one thing that obviously is going to have a massive impact, not just on college athletics, but on the country, is what happens in November. I think the election will potentially change a lot, but a lot in terms of the government's view on workers in general and the rights of workers, which would include college athletes. And what we've seen with the current administration is a belief, and this coming from the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, that college athletes should be treated as employees. And if college athletes are treated as employees, that creates put aside all the antitrust issues, that creates a whole new set of issues where potentially they would be entitled to minimum wage and then overtime. So they would be logging their hours and you'd pay them, whether you're a football player, a baseball player, a softball player. And they also might, and these are two different areas of law, but might be entitled to unionize and then collectively bargain for their wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment. We're headed down that path. Now things could change to take us off of that path, but that is one possible scenario where many college athletes are employees and are treated like employees. To back up for a second and sort of answer your question more broadly, and it goes back to what Ed mentioned at the beginning, where I think we'll be is depends on where we want to be.
That's right.
Depends on what the conferences and the schools decide they want to do. Do they want to go to a more professionalized model that has 40 or 50, just focusing on football for now, 40 or 50 schools paying a lot of money to their athletes? Do they want to have every school under the same umbrella within Division I? I think a model, and Len, you and I have talked about this a lot, is better integrating athletics into academics So I mentioned earlier the difference between the treatment of a music student and a student athlete. Why do we treat the study of music so differently than the study of sports? Why, when a musician is rehearsing, do we say, oh, great job in focusing on your music? But when an athlete is practicing, we say, why are you spending so much time not focused on your academics? Why do we consider music part of academics but not sports? And is there a way to bring sports more over to that other side of the line? Maybe not for every team and every sport, but if we can make sports more consistent with the academic mission and actually further the academic mission, I think that creates a very different path for college sports. Maybe not everybody goes down that path, but I think that is an option. So again, I will put it back on all of you in this room. You have the opportunity to help shape the future of college sports. What would I like to see? I would like to see broad-based opportunities, gender equity, and I'd also like to see Duke and Tulane win national championships. So whatever that model is, and St. John's, of course. That goes to that. I wouldn't leave that for you.
Hopefully you're not giving college sports the same odds as
Quickly, I would say this, being really blunt. I got to be careful on this answer because I'm an AD. He's able to say what he wants. NCAA and institutions. We're a member, of course, but you have to follow the money, right? You're all smart sports business people here. How many here have either college debt or are paying a large tuition bill right now? Yeah. So that's not just an athletics conversation of realignment. No one likes to see, no disrespect, Duke play Stanford or Duke play SMU. That's weird this year, right? That's going to happen. And that's going to continue to happen because they have to follow the money. We just gave you 19 items on a laundry list of revenue sharing, NIL, capital projects, recruiting budgets, coaches' salaries, firing of coaches, paying old coaches. The money, it's just the laundry list gets this and this. And they cannot continue as an institution continue to raise your tuition. That cannot be the revenue stream of a higher educational institution. Just keep raising tuition. We all get that, right? I don't want to get political with everybody. We all know the world's a lot of crazy challenges. So how creatively, not just an athletics department, but in higher education. So got to follow the money, and to jump to a conference because it's a large TV deal. You heard Neil and Val earlier. TV money is driving so much of this. How do we continue to find alternate revenue generating streams? How do we continue to fundraise as best we can? NIL isn't going anywhere, right? The train's already left the station on that. So how do we continue to find revenue? So unfortunately, I think, loyalty or tradition or brands, unfortunately, that's gone. And that's, I know it's sad. I'm a purist. I love college basketball. I grew up in New York City. But how do we continue to evolve and maintain the best we can and be clear and transparent about that? But I think it's going to continue to follow that money. I don't know how sustainable all those avenues are, but whether you're a state or public school, especially state schools, that's all public information on how they're spending their dollars on athletics. They have to justify a return on investment. And I want to add one more. You didn't comment on this, Len, and I get this now. I've been 4 days on the job. I've been asked to meet with 10 private equity companies this week in Manhattan. Ed, go meet with the private equity company. They'll give you $10 million. We'll give it to the kids for NIL. It will be great. We'll win a national championship. It'll be fine. Like, whoa. Luckily, I come from my former life being an entrepreneur. Private equity is great, and that may be the future of how we have to creatively find revenue dollars. But they're shareholders, they're investors. There's an interest rate there. There's a vested interest gain for everybody that they want from giving you private equity money. So how are we doing that creatively where we can't just spend that money, we actually have to invest that money to make sure we're providing a return not only for the private equity investor, but for the institution. So private equity is going to play a role in this. Everybody that sees an opportunity to make money is going to play a role in this. But we got to be careful and cautious, but we also need to be open-minded because we need to find new streams of money.
Well, in the immortal words of Jim Morrison of The Doors, the future remains uncertain. And for college sports, the end is always near. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been wonderful, and thank you all.